Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf Vav. Today's daf is dedicated to the safety of Israel from the Iranian attack and wishing everyone good safety and security. And today's daf is also sponsored by Mitzia and David Geffen in loving memory of Mitzia's mother, Ruth Tal Lach, on her 30th yahrzeit. She was a loving wife, mother, and mother-in-law, devoted Zionist, and wonderful educator in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. All four of her children made Aliyah, and her many grandchildren and great-grandchildren, as well as her great-grandchild, all live in Israel. Okay, I wish all of us strength to get through the stuff in our learning today. And just as a point, as Gita made before class, just to prepare everyone, this chapter is definitely one of the challenging chapters of Shas. So if you're finding it difficult, you are not alone. Okay, with that, we're going to get started. The main thing we need to understand, we're going to talk about two topics today. So even though it might be a little complicated, the content, the topic are two basic topics. One is Rav and Levi that we discussed yesterday. Can a matbea nasa chalipin? Okay, what that means, again, a chalipin could be one of two things. It could be I transfer something to you and you do something to me, right? We do a barter. I pull one item. The other item is automatically yours, even if it's still in my domain, okay? Because we did a transfer here. And the question is, if it was money that I pulled as part of a chalipin, as a barter, we were trading money for an item. If I pull that money, will that work for a chalipin transaction? Can that be my chalipin? Or alternatively, chalipin could be this kinyan sudar, what we always call a handkerchief, right? I don't know if you're selling your chametz, but often when you sell your chametz, when you don't do it online and, virtually, so usually you go to, let's say the rabbi or whoever's selling your chametz for you, and you do a symbolic transaction, you pick up a handkerchief, okay? And that's a way of showing we're doing an act of acquiring. We're showing seriousness of purpose here, right? That's the main reason for doing it. It's not like in Bechira Chametz especially, right? I'm just talking about this because it's relevant now. There's no actual, you're not really selling, right? But you're doing a transaction. You're showing, I'm serious about this. So you pick up a handkerchief. So can you pick up money? Can that work to do the chalipin transaction? Okay, that's issue number one. Issue number two is, can you acquire money through a chalipin transaction? Okay, let's say we were trading two items and one of them was money and I pulled one item. Does it mean the money is in your possession already? It's as if it's yours. Okay, then again, there's really two main ramifications for this. And by the way, let's say we did a handkerchief transaction to show that I'm giving you money that's, let's say, in my house, but we're not in my house right now. And I lift a handkerchief to show I'm serious about this. Does that work to move the money that it's really yours? Okay. Now, again, there's two main ramifications. We talked about this a few days ago. To saying that there's a kinyan here. What does it mean? It means, number one, we can't change our minds anymore. We can't renege on the deal. Number two, right? Even if we did, we get cursed because Misha Para, right? We made a commitment. You have to keep your commitment, but legally, right? You can really change your mind if you want, if it's not a kinyan. And number two, who has responsibility for the item? If it's already yours and it's in my domain and it gets lost, well, tough luck on you. If it's still mine and I just owe it to you, then I owe it to you still, no matter what happens to it in my domain. Those are two ramifications. That's the basic introduction you need for today's stuff. So Rav and Levi deliberated the first one, which was, can you use a matbea in a chalipin transaction to affect the kinyan? Right? Make it happen, affect in that way. But now Rav Papa comes, I'm going to review this last line of Rav Papa, end of Mem Hamabet. Rav Papa says, even if you side on the side that says, Ein matbea nasa chalipin, okay? So it can't be chalipin, but the second issue I mentioned, but you can acquire the money through a chalipin transaction. Okay, so again, if we lifted a handkerchief and I said, I'm giving you my money, and the money that's in my house is yours now, right? This pile of money I have, let's say, then the deed is done. The money's yours. Just like Rav Nachman, and we talked about this machlok of Rav Nachman, Rav Sheshet, which we're going to talk about again today, which is when you do a chalipin transaction, we learn it from the chalitza, it has to be like a shoe. Rav Nachman says, like a shoe means it has to be really like a shoe. It can't be peirot, can't be animals, it can't be money, it can't be any of those things, okay? It has to be a vessel, a utensil, something that has purpose in that way. So now, they say, just like peyrot for Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman thinks peyrot can't, again, I'm going back to the two issues I discussed. Peyrot can't be used as the object that you're going to be, right, as the object of that's affecting the transition. But of course, right, but you could acquire produce through a chalipin transaction. Again, it's just not that when you can't pick up fruits as a symbolic act. That's why, by the way, we always use a handkerchief and not fruits or something else. It has to be something that's more like a vessel to be Yotzei Rav Nachman's opinion. So, but even though you can't use it as the item that's affecting the transition, you can actually acquire fruits by lifting a handkerchief, for example. Okay? So now, Tivanami Loshna. So we'll say the money's the same thing, Rav Papa says. Money can't be used to affect the transaction, but it can be acquired through a chalipin transaction. So now we're going to bring a difficulty on Rav Papa. And in fact, not only when we raise a difficulty, we're not going to resolve it eventually. And Rav Papa himself is going to change his mind. And we're going to know that through a story that happened where, I'm going to just give you all the background. He had an easy solution to do a chalipin transaction, and he did it in a more complicated way. And that must prove that he didn't think in the end that you could really do this. Okay? So Metzia. To understand this, before we understand this, I'm going to read you a Mishna from Maaser Sheni, the one that comes before this Mishna. We're basically reading a Mishna Maaser Sheni. But before, you have to understand some basics about Maaser Sheni. Second tithe, what's supposed to happen? We've learned this many, many times. We just discussed this the other day. You bring your fruits to Jerusalem. What do? Instead of bringing them, you redeem them onto a coin. Now, when you redeem it onto the coin, you have to add a fifth. But only if you're redeeming your own Maaser Sheni fruits. What if I ask you as a favor, or you just decide for whatever reason, to redeem my Maaser Sheni fruits? If you do that, you don't have to add a fifth. It's only redeeming your own fruits, not someone else's fruits. So comes the Mishna and says, you could do a trick here, a halachic loophole, to avoid paying that fifth. Ma'alimin, that's the word for a fake out. You can fake out halacha kind of thing. Maaser Sheni. Ketzad. I mean, Mishna Maaser Sheni, 4th chapter, 4th Mishna. You can say to your older children or to your slaves who are Jewish slaves, here, I'm giving you a gift of money. Take this money as a gift. It's yours now. Once it's yours, now can you redeem my Maaser Sheni fruits? You can do that because at that point, someone is taking your money, which now is their money, and they're redeeming your Maaser Sheni with their own money. That works. Okay? Okay, so you can do that. So which the Gemara says, now we're going to quote the next Mishna. Okay? I'm standing on my threshing with you. And I say, and by the way, this Mishna isn't just your older son or daughter or your Jewish slave. It could be your friend. Okay? So we're standing in the goren, in the threshing floor. Now, I don't have money on me. The best way to do this is for me to give you the money as a gift, because in the end, what happens? You're redeeming my fruits, right? With your money. That's the simplest way to do it. What if we did the reverse? I gave you my fruits and told you, and then I gave you my fruits as a gift, and then I redeemed my fruits, which are now your fruits, with my money. That doesn't look as good. Because in the end, I'm doing the act of redeeming, and in the end, they were really my fruits. Now, it's true technically. It can work, but it's less ideal. Because you doing the act of pidyon looks a lot better than me doing the act of pidyon. Even though, again, I've given you the fruits, but this is a less ideal option. So this Mishnah is talking about that less ideal option. And it says, listen, if you don't have money, and you still want to get out of adding this extra fifth, we'll give you another solution. Kind of funny, they're giving you these solutions to get out of this payment. But anyway, so basically I say, my fruits, they're a gift to you. And then a minute later, I say, I don't have money there, but what do I say? I have money at home, sitting on my kitchen table as a pile of money, or in my wallet, I have $100, right? I'm redeeming those fruits onto my $100 that is in my wallet. And I can do that, right? They're not my fruits anymore. I can do that. And now I don't have to add the fifth. Now, point out here, this was all because you didn't have money in your possession. But what if I did have money? obviously, what would be the ideal? And now I read this to you before, but Gemara doesn't assume that you knew that Mishnah. But if you have money, what would you obviously do? What we saw in the previous Mishnah. Have your friend acquire the ma'ot by pulling them, right? Act of acquiring, uparik, and your friend will redeem them. That's obviously the option. That's the better option. Because then you have a different person who's not the owner of the fruits doing the pidyon, which is much better. In this case, you're doing the pidyon, which is not so good. Okay, that's all. We didn't get to our point yet. Now, the assumption is I don't have money here, but I have money at home, right? That's why it works. Otherwise, it wouldn't work at all. Because what do I do in the end? I redeem it with my money I have at home on fruits that are now yours. Right? That's basically what I did here, because I gave you the fruits as a gift, and then I redeem them with my money. Now, here comes the key. If money could be acquired through a kinyan chalipin, if I can give you my money using chalipin, a symbolic act, and the money doesn't have to be here, well, then why don't I just do an act of chalipin, pick up a handkerchief that's laying around in the threshing floor, and basically give you as a gift with this chalipin act, pick up the handkerchief, just like we do in mechira chametz. The chametz isn't there, right? Pick it up, and with that, the money will be yours. And then you could say, oh, the money I have in Michelle's house is now I'm going to redeem the fruits. That would be a much better option. So what do you see here? There's no chalipin. Why is there no chalipin? Because you can't acquire money through a kinyan chalipin. So the Gemara says, that's not a good answer. You could say, delaytle sudar. Maybe you didn't have a handkerchief on the threshing floor. You didn't have anything to use. Okay. So Gemara says, fine, you didn't have that. There's still another way you could do it. Nikne nielu agav karka. You could have acquired the money by land. Remember this? You can give someone land, a little piece of land, and with that, you can give them, right, like you can use that. With the land, they can also acquire metaltalin of yours. So you could say, here, take this piece of land, and with that, the money that's in my house will be yours. Well, you could say, delaytle karka. Maybe the person didn't have any land. Then they say, Vahal me begorin katani. What do you mean he didn't have land? He was standing on his threshing floor. Of course, the person had land, okay? So again, let's say it was me. I could have used my land of my threshing floor, given you a little corner of it, and said, with that, acquire the money in my house, and you could have then redeemed my Maaser Sheni fruits. That would have been the best solution. Well, begorin she'eno shalom. Must have been, wasn't my gorin. So now we're basically saying, if there was a sudar, right, maybe it would have worked. The only reason why this didn't work is because he didn't have a sudar. So now they say, I don't understand. The kapel tana lashmin gavra atilai delaytle velo klum. The Tana is giving you a case of a naked person that doesn't have anything, and he had clothes on him. He could have used the clothes, right? It doesn't make sense. This must show basically that you're wrong, Rav Papa. And ein matbe'ah nasa chalipin, because there's no way that this person didn't have some object in that threshing floor that they could have used to acquire it. And therefore, it must be that you just can't do this. And the money couldn't have been acquired through a kinyan chalipin. And again, it couldn't have been acquired through land because the person didn't own any land. And it couldn't have been acquired through chalipin because there must have been something they could have used for chalipin. You can't say you didn't have a sudar, right? He must have been wearing, that's why they say he must have been naked. What? He didn't have clothes on? Just pick up a piece of your shirt, give it to the person, and that could have worked. To which they say, now therefore it must be that you learn from here, ein matbe'ah nikneh b'chalipin. You actually can't acquire money through a chalipin transaction. Otherwise, that would have been a much more ideal solution. And the fact that the Mishna doesn't suggest that must mean it doesn't work. Shema minak. Okay, conclusion. So what do we do with Rav Papa? Well, the Gemara says, Af Rav Papa had Rabbi, as I told you before, even Rav Papa changed his mind. How do we know this? We know it from a story. This is a story we've seen before. Saw it in Bava Kama. And we just talked about Beit Hosai. You remember in the Mari Bar Isaac story, his brother, so-called brother, came from very far away from the city Beit Hosai. So we have another case, and this is really where we saw Beit Hosai the first time. Rav Papa havale tresar alfei dinare Beit Hosai. He had 12,000 dinarim he loaned to someone that the person was now in Beit Hosai, and he had no way to get it back. He didn't want to make the long trip to Beit Hosai to get it back. And this person didn't want to send it with a messenger. Because if he sends it with a messenger, what happens? If I owe you money, I'm not exempt from paying you that money until it gets to your hands. So if I live really far away and I send someone on this long, long journey and anything can happen along the way, imagine, right? Nowadays, right, if you travel with a lot of cash, which nobody really does anymore because you don't need cash anymore. But in the old days, when you used to travel with a lot of cash, you buy a money belt, something to protect your money and put it up against your body so no one would steal it. So in this case, right, who would take that risk? It's a lot of money. Nobody wants to carry around that much cash. So basically, and it's not just that no one want to do it, the shaliach doesn't care, they'll do it. But what's the problem? The problem is the person who's returning the money, who owes the money, is unwilling to give it to anybody, because if something were to happen to the money, they'd have to take out another 12,000 dinarim and return it. They're not going to fulfill their returning the loan until the money gets to Rav Papa. So basically, nobody wanted to return this money. The person he borrowed from didn't want to return the money. So what happened? What's the only solution? Well, what did he do? He said, listen, Rav Shmuel bar Acha, I want you to go get this money for me. I know the guy's not going to give it to you, so I'll tell you how we're going to do this. I'm going to give you the rights to that money right now. Now, what's the best way to do it? The easiest, simplest way to do it? Kinyan chalipin, right? Lift a handkerchief. With that, Rav Shmuel will acquire the money. Once the money's his, when Joe Schmo, who's sitting in Beichozai, gives the money to Rav Shmuel, he basically returned the loan, because the loan became Rav Shmuel's and the money became Rav Shmuel. Now, Rav Papa obviously trusted Rav Shmuel, that when Rav Shmuel got back to the city where they're living, he'll give it to Rav Papa. Okay, it's not like he's going to keep it for himself, but he'll give it to Rav Papa. But at that point, Rav Shmuel will assume achrayut, he'll assume responsibility because it's his. It doesn't matter anymore. At that point, the person, Joe Schmo, who needs to return the money, is happy to return the money because he's done. He's given it back to its rightful owner, because at this point, he's the rightful owner. Now, how's Rav Papa going to give the money to Rav Shmuel and have it, right? It's not here. So he'll do a chalipin. That's the easiest, simplest way. If you hold it, you could do chalipin, right? You can acquire money through a kinyan chalipin. Pick up a handkerchief and the money's yours. But he doesn't do that. He does it agav asife debate. He goes back to what we just talked about. Kinyan agav karka. He gives him a little portion of the threshold of his house. He said, I'm giving this to you as a gift. With that, you will acquire all that money. Okay? So that's a more complicated way to do it. It's obviously much easier to pick up a handkerchief and not have to give someone a piece of your land that they now own. So that proves that Rav Papa changed his mind, because, right, otherwise he could have done it. And just the end of the story is Ki'ata, when the guy actually successfully got the money back and came back without it getting stolen, Rav Papa was so happy because he thought, I'll never see this money again. He went out. Some people say Tavach is a city. He went to the city of Tavach to greet him, which was, I guess, closer, obviously, to where Rav Papa was living. And he was so excited that he actually got the money back. Okay, end of story. So again, the summary of this section, Rav Papa said, even if you say the money can't be the part that's affecting the transaction, then that creates the transaction, still you could acquire money through a kinyan chalipin, right? A symbolic handkerchief or something like that. And we rejected that from this Mishna Maaser Sheni because they don't suggest that. And we then said Rav Papa even himself doesn't do this because look what he did in this story. It's an interesting way to learn from him what he did or didn't do, right? Both these cases are both the Maaser Sheni, and it's because, again, chalipin is just much simpler. And the fact that they don't suggest the simpler option must mean that it's not an option. Now we're going to go back to the first machloket about, can you use the money as the symbolic thing? Or again, if you're doing a barter and one person pulls the money, if we're doing a trade, money for animal, can the money, once the money goes to the other side, can that affect the transaction? So we're back to that issue. V'chein amar Ulla ein matbe'an asa chalipin. V'chein amar Rabbi Ashi ein matbe'an asa chalipin. V'chein amar Rabbi Rabbi Yochanan ein matbe'an asa chalipin. We have three rabbis. We have Ulla, Rabbi Ashi, Rabbi Yochanan, who all are quoted as saying this doesn't work. We're going to bring three questions. That's going to be basically our sugya for today. Three difficulties we're going to raise on this. Eitive Rabbi Abba Ulla. Rabbi Abba comes, throws this source as a question on Ulla, Tanaitic source, and then Rabbi Abba in the end, we're going to see Ulla is silent, doesn't know what to say. Rabbi Abba himself is going to resolve it. And then we're going to have two different ways to resolve this. One, Rav Ashi is going to resolve it as well in a different way. You walking in the shuk one day, and guys who you hired come over to you and say, hey, you never paid us. Give us the money now. You're in the shuk. You happen not to have the money on you. So what do? Amar l'shulchani. You're going to go to a money lender or money changer, really, who happens to have cash on hand because that's what they do. That's their business. And you're going to go and say the following thing. Now, this is going to sound like interest. Okay? We're going to get back to interest right now, and we're going to have to explain why this isn't interest. And then that's going to prove that you can use money as a chalipin. So let's see. Teili b'dinar ma'ot v'afrain same. Says, listen, you go to this money changer and say, I owe these guys money. They're begging me for money. I gotta deal with it right now. So can you give me some money right now? A dinar I need. Right, give it to me in ma'ot. Give me some coins of the worth of a dinar. And I'll bring you from my house whenever, next week, next month, whatever, it doesn't matter. Some future point, I'll give you a dinar plus. Okay, let's just go to $100. I'll give you $102. Okay, Tracy is a small coin. Because otherwise, why would the money changer do it, right? Unless he's going to gain from this. So he's basically buying $100 for $102. And that's what he's doing. That sounds like repeat. Sounds like interest. You're basically taking a loan, right? And then giving it back with more money. That's forbidden. But it says, Im yesh lo ma'ot, if I have the money at home, you have the money, let's say you're the one in the story, sorry. You have the money at home, you can actually do this. V'im lav, if you don't, asur. Now, why does that help? Well, let's explain. Isal kadatach ein matbea nasa chalipin. Now what happens? What's the matbea here that we want to say is the chalipin? When you pull the money, take it from the money changer, you're basically pulling the money. That's the chalipin. In that way, you're basically saying the money that's sitting in my wallet or on my kitchen table or wherever it is in my house is now yours. And then it's not a loan. A loan is, I'm taking something and I'll give it to you later. Now, you're right, I'm giving it to you later. But what I'm basically saying is it's yours right now. A loan is you're giving me money. I don't have the money at home. Even if I did, it's not, right? That's not the issue. The point is I'm going to give you some money back later. But if I basically say I'm with this transaction, I pull the money or you pull the money, it doesn't matter which one of us. By pulling the money, I'm basically giving you that money in my house. Okay? I'm giving the money changer the money in my house. So the money changer is now the owner of that money in my house. Then there's no time problem here. There's no lag of time. A loan, right, is only, the problem of rebate is only when there's a time lag. Here now again, there is technically a time lag, but it's not really, because from right this moment, you own that, the money changer, owns that money in my house. So if you say, Ein matbea nasa chalipin, you can't affect a transaction with money when you or me pulls the money from the money changer. That can't affect the transaction. So that money in my house is not belonging to the money changer. Then then it's a hava'ava, asur, and it should be forbidden. So Ishtik, Ulla was silent, didn't know what to say. Ulla Rabbi Abba says, maybe we didn't understand the case properly. Dilma idi b'prototot shanu. Okay, what's prototot? We'll see in a minute. Deleka alayu tiva. They don't have a form on them. They don't have there's no image on them. There were coins that were flat. And maybe what we're talking about is coins that have value, but they were like a simonim, like we talked about the other day. And basically, I'm going to trade you prototot for prototot. And then that's more like metaltalim. It's like movable property. It's not coins. Okay, so as long as we can remove and say, oh, this wasn't coins, then we're bad. It's a little bit of a hard interpretation, but that's what they say. And therefore, it's like payroll. We could trade my fruits for your fruits. That works. Now, by the way, that only works if you're not Rav Nachman. Because remember, Rav Nachman said you can't use payroll for chalipin. But let's assume right now we're on Rav Sheshet. That's why I said we're going to get back to them. So option number one to resolve this contradiction is to explain that we're talking about things that are like payroll. Okay? And therefore, they're regular betaltalim, they're money without an image on them, and therefore it's like movables. And therefore, it doesn't teach you anything about money. And in fact, Ulla says, oh, that's a good interpretation. I'll prove it to you. Because what's the language? Daitanami, you can learn it from the language of the braita. The katani yafet dinar utresi. Below katani dinar yafet utresi. He said, I'll give you the worth of a dinar and a tracy. He didn't say, I'll give you a dinar yafeh, which would be a nice dinar and a tracy. He didn't say, I'll give you one dinar and one tracy, which would have been money. So I'll give you the value of that, which could be in prototot, okay? And that's why he says, Shema Mina, that I can prove your reading. Rav Ashi gives a second interpretation. Rav Ashi Amar, the truth is I was wrong. We don't end up explaining this according to Rav Sheshet. The next one we're going to explain according to Rav Sheshet, Rav Nachman. We'll get back there. Rav Ashi Amar la'olam b'damim u'b'prototot. It could be damim, it could be prototot, could be one was damim, one was prototot, doesn't matter. But how can I explain this? Kevan de'itle, why is this not alone? Because as long as you have it in your possession, nasa ke'omer halveni ad she'yavo b'ni o ad shem samaftech. Remember we had this? Where you can't lend a se'ah b'se'ah, right? Chitim b'chitim, because what might happen when you return the chitim, they might be worth more. So in this case, what do we say? But if you have chitim in your house and you say, I want to borrow a pound of wheat, and the pound of wheat in my house will be yours, it works. So you can do the same thing here. Meaning this is not a chalipin transaction. It's not working because they're acquired you through chalipin. This is working because you're allowed to do a loan in that way. You can do a loan as long as you already have the object in your possession and say, I'm giving this to you. Okay, now, is this the same as se'ah b'se'ah? Not exactly. Okay, do you remember why does this work? Because you're basically saying, I have this in my house, I just can't access it now. I lost the key, or I'm waiting for my son to get home. And you're basically saying, I'm going to pay you more, right? Oh, now, in the se'ah b'se'ah case, you're actually paying the same amount. It's just, there's a concern maybe when you actually return them, the se'ah will go up in value and you're giving the actual price. So Rashi explains it the way I did, and I'm explaining Rashi, but there's a big difficulty in Rashi because it's not exactly se'ah b'se'ah, because what I'm saying is I'm giving you this money, which is actually more money than I'm taking. In se'ah b'se'ah, they're worth the same when I say it. When I say I'm going to, this wheat in my house will be yours right now, it's the exact same value. And we're only just concerned, right? The reason why it only works if it's in my house is because if I return it later, I might return it, it'll be a higher value. Anyway, that only works as the same value. Rashi seems to be saying, even if it's more, even if I borrow a se'ah and I say, I'll give you a se'ah plus, if I have it in the house, it works. A lot of commentators say, no way does that work. That's already rebate. So there's a bit of a question on Rashi here, but I'm going to stick with Rashi anyway. Rashi seems to say, if I promise you a dinar and a tray seat for a dinar, if I have the money in my house, it's as if it's a sale, not a loan. It's as if I'm buying 100 for 102. Okay, that's basically the way we view it because it's in my house. Again, some of the commentaries have field day with Rashi and say that no way can that work, but I'll put that issue aside right now. So we did so far in this section, we saw 3 rabbis all held ein matbea nasa chalipin. You cannot use it to affect the transaction. We basically had Rabbi Abba who questioned Ulla specifically from this source, which looks like the money affected the transaction, to which they say, basically, no. We have 2 ways of reading it. Either it was all prototot where it wasn't money at all, or it could even be money, but basically we're doing like a sale here of money to money, and it works, and it's not rebate, and it doesn't have to do with this kinyan chalipin. To which the Gemara raises question number 2 against these people. So, Tashma, here's a Mishna in Kiddushin, which we don't really understand what that means. I'll try to literally translate the words. Something which can be made money to something, right, for someone else. Once one, okay, this was, if you remember, there was a whole section of kinyanim we learned about in Kiddushin. When one acquires the damim, the money, it sounds like, right? Assuming we mean kol anasa damim means something that you're giving for value, you're paying money for. Once one acquires one, the other acquires the other. So if it's I take the animal and then you take the money, once I take the animal, the money's yours. Or it could be the reverse. Once I take the money, the animal's yours. So that looks like money can be affect the transaction in chalipin. So first they ask, what is this? It sounds like it's a matbea. What is it? Nasa damim. It becomes valued as money. That's a coin. That's exactly what a coin is. Ushma mina matbea nasa chalipin, against all those rabbis. Amar Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says, no, haki kamar, turning out a bet. This is what it means. Kol hanishom damim ba'achel. Anything that, okay, Rashi is going to basically say this means any movable item, which can be evaluated with a number, okay, right? Anything can, if I sell you an animal, what do? We figure out what is the animal worth, and then I pay you for it, right? So it means any movable item, which you can put a price tag on, basically what it says. So what it means is, if I trade you an animal for an animal, let's say, so you pull my animal, the animal that's still in my possession becomes yours, even though it's still in my possession, which again means if something happens to it, I have to replace it for you, right? I'm sorry, I don't have to replace it because it's yours already, and right, not my responsibility. And we can't change our minds about it. Hachinami Stabrim, we can further prove this reading, which again then says that not a matbea, we're not talking about a matbea here, we're not talking about money. And how can we further prove this? Well, this is going to really prove it. And then you're going to wonder, why did they even think this was different? Because it says, the continuation of that Mishna is, Mitkatane Seifa, Ketzad, how does this work? And it says, Hichlif shor b'para chamor b'shul. Oh, it gives an example of what an Nishom Damim is. And it says, it's like trading a cow for an ox or a donkey for an ox. Okay, well, that's pretty obvious then. It wasn't talking about money. It was talking about metaltalin, movables, shmami now. So now the Gemara asks, so what were you thinking in the first place? Why did you even think it meant money? How would you possibly understand that line? This is how they read it. This is like, even though they don't say this, it's kind of like missing words and a transition here. What it started with was money can affect the transaction. If I trade money for an animal, let's say, you pull the money, it's already, the animal is yours. And not only that, but also pere themselves can be the object, okay? Right? Nowadays especially, right? Normally you buy things with money. Even if you trade things, it would also be that way. Ketzad, hichlif shor b'para chamor b'shor, and then they bring the example of the and in addition case. Again, you have to have words to do this, but okay. Now we're going to go back to our interpretation. So the way we read this Mishnah now, after we interpreted, what we did was we interpreted it the first way we thought. That was a question on those rabbis. We resolved it by changing the meaning of the Mishnah. Then we said, what were they even thinking the first way? And now we're going back to the way we actually translate the Mishnah, that the whole Mishnah is talking about metaltalin. Now, it means, right, we do a kinyan metaltalin. We trade a chamor for a para, or a chamor for a shor, whatever it is. I pull your donkey. My cow that you're buying is now yours, okay, even though it's still in my possession. That's what it's saying. This is only going to work according to who? Rav Sheshet, because remember, Rav Nachman doesn't think that you can use payrot as the chalipin, doesn't affect the transaction. So according to Rav Nachman, how would you read this Mishnah? It doesn't work if it's money. It doesn't work if it's an animal, because all of that is in the category of payrot, not utensils. And remember, Rav Nachman said only something that's like a shoe from the chalitza pasuk. Only, right? We're going to get to this machloket also tomorrow and understand them even better. So that's what the Gemara is going to ask. Rav Sheshet, this explanation you gave in the Mishnah works for Rav Sheshet. It's a cow for an ox. Damar peri avde chalipin, but Rav Nachman damar kli in aval peri lo avde chalipin. If you say like Rav Nachman though, my ketzad, how does it work? So hachi kamar. And again, this is a little bit difficult. We're going to go with one interpretation, but again, there's some difficulties about any interpretation you go with. I'll go with one for simplicity's sake, but we'll raise the fact that there are some issues with this. But hachi kamar. Yesh damim shehen kechalipin. Even though Rav Nachman thinks you can't affect a transaction not with not with produce or animal, which is like produce, and not with money. Right? Why is it like produce? Because it's not a vessel, right? A utensil. Anything that's not a utensil is called pere here. This is the way you read it. Once in a while, damim could work for chalipin. This is how Rav Nachman will read the Mishnah. Okay, what would be the case? Ketzad. He chalip and he adds one word, dimei shor b'para, or dimei chamor b'shor. You're trading the value of a chamor for a shor. Okay, what does this mean? So it means, Okay, again, we're going to go with one interpretation. I bought your donkey. Okay, or let's say here, Demei Shor B'Para. I bought your para, and then I was supposed to give you my shore. But you decide that instead of, I was supposed to give you money. Apologies. I was supposed to pay you for the para. Okay, so I bought your cow, and I'm supposed to pay you money. Now, instead of paying you money, you decide, you know what? I like your shore, and it's worth the same amount as the money. I'm going to take your shore instead. Now, I owed you money. And now, instead of giving you money, I'm going to give you my ox. Now, as soon as you basically say, I don't want the money, okay, that's like canceling this payment that I owe you. I want the ox becomes yours, even though it's in my domain. That's basically what we're saying. It's the demei shore, the value of the shore, which we're now basically canceling that loan, that payment that I owe you, okay? That is basically going to acquire for you the ox. So by you saying, I'm going to take the ox instead of the money, now it's weird here because there is no money even physically, right? It's just the money I owe you, the cancellation of that payment of money acquires the ox for you, and the ox is yours right away because I pulled the chamor already, right? I pulled the donkey, which was mine, or I pulled the cow, which was mine, and that made the ox turn into yours. And that was all because there was a money payment there, and by canceling that and turning it into the ox becomes yours. That's one way of interpreting this. Now, my time at Rav Nachman. Now, why would this work? Rav Nachman says you can't use anything that's not a kli, right? So how does this work? Well, Savar like Rabbi Yochanan. It's because he holds like Rabbi Yochanan. Now we're going to get to a big basic debate between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, which we'll talk about more on tomorrow's stuff, which is one thing we said from the very beginning of this chapter was money does not affect a kinyan, right? That's the whole thing, and that's what we're talking about now also. It can't be in a chalipin or any kind of, if I pay money for an item, and you didn't give it to me yet, it's not mine. Now, why is that? So we're going to have a big debate. Is it that by Torah law, it's just not a thing? Money doesn't affect an act of acquiring? Or is it a rabbinic decree? So now I'm going to already give you the end here so you have the whole picture. Once we put it in the category of rabbinic decree, and by Torah law, money actually would acquire. But the rabbis made a gzera. They said, well, we're not going to let this work, though, for a reason we're going to see inside, which we actually learned a while ago. But once we say that, rabbinic decrees only apply in common cases. Now, how common do you think this case is of the demei para b'shor, okay, or demei shor b'para, right? That case I just described, that I'm supposed to pay you money, and then in the end you decide you want my ox instead, is a rare case. If it's a rare case, then we revert back to Torah law. And Torah law is that money can acquire. So when we come up with a very unique situation, we can say in that case, money will acquire, even to the one who says money doesn't. Okay, and that's what we're going to see right now. And that's how we resolve this according to Rav Nachman. So, and then again, this is a third interpretation. First, we thought it was talking about money in the first place. Then we said it's not money, it's talking about trading two animals. And then we said that only works according to Rav Sheshet, though, right? Which then wouldn't be a problem with our whole thing, chalipin, because, right? Then we basically say, oh no, that doesn't work for Rav Nachman. We're going to have an alternative explanation of this Mishna. I see you're saying it's not so rare, but I think it is rare because our agreement was first about money, and then we changed it. That's rare. Okay, maybe in the first place we could agree to switch shore for para. That's not what we're talking about. Remember, we first agreed to money, and then we changed our, you changed your mind. So now they say, my time at Rav Nachman Savar like Rabbi Yochanan Damar. Dvar Torah ma'ot konot. By Torah law, ma'ot really do work to make a kinyan, but why can't we say it does? Now, why did they say it doesn't work? You have to be moshech the object and not by paying the money. This will kind of make very tangible this issue we've been discussing. If I pay money, and with that I acquire the wheat that I purchased from you, but the wheat is in your possession and you haven't given it to me yet. As long as you haven't given it to me yet, the rabbis say, this doesn't work. Because what? I paid the money. Once I paid the money, if the object becomes mine, I assume responsibility for it, not you. You're not responsible anymore. What if you end up, they're in your attic, and you have a fire there? You'll say, what do I care about Michelle's stuff? Let it burn. It's not mine anymore. I don't have responsibility for it. So because the object is still in your warehouse, so to speak, right? We want you to assume responsibility for it, not me. Otherwise, we end up with problems that you just don't care about my stuff. So that's why when I pay the money, that doesn't affect the transition. But by Torah law, it would. And therefore, Milta Deshlicha, Gaz Rabbi Rabbanan, the rabbis institute this in a typical sale. But Milta de lo Shlicha, like in this weird case where we switch the money for an ox, Lo Gaz Rabbi Rabbanan. The rabbis didn't decree. And that's why in this case, Rav Nachman would say money would work. And that's how he reads this Mishna. Ulla Reish Lakish. Now we have to go back to Reish Lakish. How's Reish Lakish going to understand this then? Da'amar Mishicha Mefureshet min Torah. Mishicha is the only way to do kinyan by Torah law. And it never worked even by Torah law. Then how on earth would you explain the Mishnah? So, well, remember, we only explain the Mishnah this way because of Rav Nachman. So, Rav Sheshet. We could go back to the previous interpretation. Sure, for para, you can do that because that's the chalipin. Because an animal, right? You can use a vessel, a utensil, or an animal as long as it's not money, right? But anything else works. So if that would work if he held like Rav Sheshet. But Isavar like Rav Nachman, Damar Peri lo avde chalipin. But if he says money's lo avde chalipin and matbea lo kane, then how's he going to explain that Mishnah? Can't be talking about money like we thought, option one. Can't be talking about animals trading because that doesn't work for him either. And we can't explain it like we explained according to Rabbi Yochanan because ma'od are not konok for by Torah law. So al korcha ke Rav Sheshet mitaritza. We basically have to say that Reish Lakish must hold like Rav Nachman because like Rav Sheshet, because there's no way to explain this Mishnah according to both Reish Lakish and Rav Nachman. Okay. Last issue for today, last source, and we're actually going to go back to our Mishnah. Tana, kol metaltalin konim zeh zeh. Va'amar Reish Lakish, here we're going to have a problem. Reish Lakish, when we said metaltalin, okay, metaltalin isn't money. But Reish Lakish himself said, "Afilu kis malei ma'ot bekis malei ma'ot." If we change a bag of money for a bag of money, we do a trade, they're acquired. Now that's money. How could you do money in chalipin? We just said you can't. And especially Reish Lakish, who says ma'ot konot min Torah. Sorry, em ma'ot konot min Torah. Even by Torah law, right? It wouldn't work. How on earth could you do this? To which they explain, this was the third question against all those rabbis who said em matbe'en asa chalipin. But now we're going to explain it, right, like all the others. Tirgama Rav Acha bedinar anika va'anigara. Two different types of coins. Echad shepesalto malchut, echad shepesalto medina. One that the king canceled. Okay, what's that? That's like a political thing. When a new king comes in, he says all the coins of the old king, right? We don't have this kind of thing anymore, but you could, right? Actually, one country takes over another, and they say all the currency of this country is now no longer, right? You're only going to use my country's currency, okay? And that's basically the malchut. That's political. Okay, we'll see in a minute what's the difference between political and chad shepesalto medina, one that just goes out of commission, like when the old shekel changed to the new shekel, right? You couldn't use the old shekels anymore, the liras, okay? Or things like that, where they basically said, oh, we're not going to accept this anymore in this country. But it could be, maybe the shekel's not the best example because it was only used in Israel, but let's say, you have certain things that were used in other countries. I don't even remember those days. Maybe it was a lira because they call it a lira. I don't know if it was something could have been used anywhere else. So maybe that's not true. Anyway, the point is maybe it could be used somewhere else. We'll get to that in a minute. It just can't be used in this country. So now they say, and then what's the issue? If these are coins that are no longer in use, then what's the value of these coins? Well, they're movable property. It's like, right, an object. And then we can do a kinyan on metaltalin. That for sure works. So it's a chalipin that's done on metaltalin that's actually money, but it's a bag of money like old coins, right? That don't actually have value to be used in the shuk. Utsricha. Now, why did you need both these cases to say it wasn't like this one for the same one that you traded two, but you traded one for the other? It's because they wanted to tell you the following. You couldn't have learned one from the other. If you say it was a political thing, this government said you can't use the old coins anymore of the old king, mishum de lo sage kla, because that can't be used at all anymore. But aval psalto medina, the sagele medina achrite, right? The ones that went out of, the country decided we don't use those coins anymore, but you could use them in a different country. And therefore, maybe you would say, well, then that's still a coin. It's not a coin here, but it's a coin in the next door country. So maybe it would still not be able to be used for chalipin. We still call it a currency. If you had that time, you would say, once this country doesn't use this coin, you can't use it in private, you can't use it in public. If a new ruler comes in and says you can't use the old currency anymore, well, that's a political thing. There might be people who disagree with the new kingdom, and they'll still with their friends, they'll trade, right, like a black market, or right, they'll still use that currency somewhere. So because of that, you might do it secretly. So maybe it's still a matbea, and therefore it's sricha. That's why you needed both of them. Okay, so a very quick summary of this stuff, because it's pretty complicated content, but the overall picture is pretty clear. We started with Rav Papa's statement that even if you say you can't use a matbea to affect the transaction, you still could buy money through a chalipin transaction. Okay, again, the pulling of the object can't be the money, or the lifting up of something symbolic can't be the money, but you could acquire money in that way. And then we showed that, number one, we have a problem with it from the Maaser Sheni Mishna, and Rav Papa even changed his mind from the story with the money he got back from Beit Hozan, where he did it in a different way, a much more complicated way than Agav Karka, and not that way. Then we had these three rabbis who all hold Ein Matbea Na'aseh Chalipin. We're back to the first issue of it affecting the transaction. We brought three sources to try to go against this, and each source we were able to explain differently in a way that didn't contradict those rabbis. And with that, we finished today's stuff. Hope that was clear. Wishing everybody a safe day. You be safe, your children, your families, and hoping for better news, b'sorot tovot, and not much more to say about the situation, but our tefillot and our learning will help improve the situation.